When a desperate young cowboy marries a wealthy 70-year-old woman to save his family ranch, he never expects to discover she's harboring a life-changing secret that will transform both their futures. Could the mysterious locked room in Eleanor's mansion hold the truth that connects their pasts in ways Jake never imagined? The smell of dirt and cow dung filled Jake Calloway's nose as he fixed the broken fence on his family's ranch. At 28 years old, his once white t-shirt was now yellow with sweat stains. His worn-out boots had holes, and his jeans were faded from too many washes. The hot Texas sun beat down on his tan neck as he hammered the last nail into place. Jake wiped his forehead with his sleeve and looked at the dry land around him. No rain had fallen for months. The cattle were getting skinny, and the grass was turning brown. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been before. "Jake, come quick!" His younger sister Lily ran toward him, her pigtails bouncing with each step. "There's a fancy car coming up the driveway." Jake squinted at the cloud of dust in the distance. A shiny black car was indeed making its way to their humble home. Nobody with a car that nice ever came to visit them. "Go tell Pa," Jake said, putting down his hammer. His heart raced with worry. Was it the bank man coming to take their home away? By the time Jake reached the porch, the car had stopped. The driver, wearing a black suit and hat, opened the back door. Out stepped an old woman dressed in clothes fancier than anything Jake had ever seen up close. Her white hair was styled perfectly, and she wore rings with stones that sparkled in the sunlight. "Eleanor Blackwood," his father whispered with surprise. "What in tarnation is she doing here?" Jake had heard stories about Eleanor Blackwood. She owned the biggest cattle ranch in the county, maybe even the state. Her family had money going back generations. Some folks said she was worth millions. "Mr. Calloway," Eleanor said, walking up to the porch with a cane but still standing tall and proud. "It's been a long time. May I come in?" Jake's father nodded silently, his face pale. They all went inside the small farmhouse. Jake's mother hurried to make tea, apologizing for not having anything fancier to offer. "I'll get right to the point," Eleanor said, sitting on their old couch like it was a throne. "I know the bank is about to take your ranch." Jake's father's face turned red with shame. "We've had some bad luck, but we'll make it through." Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The bank called in your loan. You have 30 days to pay it off or you lose everything. Is that correct?" The room fell quiet. Jake felt his stomach twist into knots. He hadn't known things were that bad. "How do you know that?" Jake's mother asked, her voice shaking. "I make it my business to know everything that happens in this county," Eleanor replied, taking a sip of tea. "I have a solution to offer you." Jake watched as Eleanor reached into her fancy purse and pulled out a check. "This will pay off your debt and give you money to get back on your feet." His father's eyes widened at the amount written on the check. "We can't accept that. We could never pay it back." "I'm not offering a loan," Eleanor said. Her sharp eyes turned to Jake. "I'm offering a deal." The way she looked at him made Jake feel like a prize cow at auction. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What kind of deal?" he asked. Eleanor smiled slowly. "Marriage." The word hung in the air like a thundercloud. Jake's mother gasped. "You can't be serious," Jake's father said, standing up. "He's 28, and you're 70. Eleanor finished for him. "Yes. I'm well aware of my age, thank you." Jake found his voice. "Why would you want to marry me?" Eleanor's eyes softened for just a moment. "I have my reasons. But here are the terms. 1 year of marriage. You move into my home. You attend social functions with me. You be a proper husband in public. At the end of the year, the marriage ends, and you keep $500,000. Jake's sister dropped her glass of water. The crash echoed through the stunned silence. "This is crazy," Jake's mother whispered. "This is business," Eleanor corrected. "Your son gets a better future. I get what I want. You keep your family home." Jake looked at the pictures on the wall. 4 generations of Calloways who had worked this land. He thought about his father's hands, cracked and bleeding from trying to save what was theirs. "I'll do it," Jake said before he could change his mind. "Jake, no!" his mother cried. Eleanor stood up, leaning on her cane. Smart boy. We'll be married by the end of the week. My lawyer will draw up the papers. As she walked out, Jake felt like he had just sold his soul. But what choice did he have? 3 days later, Jake stood in the county courthouse wearing the only suit he owned, his grandfather's funeral suit. Eleanor wore a simple cream-colored dress that probably cost more than everything in his family's house combined. Do you, Jacob Calloway, take Eleanor Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded wife? The judge asked. Jake swallowed hard. I do. The words felt like rocks in his mouth. His family watched from the back row, their faces a mix of shame, worry, and relief. The check that would save their ranch was already in his father's pocket. After the quick ceremony, Eleanor's driver took them to her mansion. Jake had never seen a house so big. It looked like it could fit his family's farmhouse inside it 10 times over. Welcome home, Eleanor said as staff members lined up to greet them. Their eyes were curious and judging. Jake felt like an animal in a zoo. That night, Jake sat alone in a bedroom bigger than his family's entire house. Eleanor had her own room down the hall. On the bedside table was a wedding gift from her, a gold watch worth more than his truck. Jake looked out the window at the miles of perfect green grass and fat cattle. All this wealth, and yet something felt empty about it all. Back in his room, he found a photo album on the shelf. Inside were pictures of Eleanor when she was young, beautiful, and smiling. In one photo, she stood next to a man who looked at her with love in his eyes. Jake wondered what had happened to that man. And he wondered what secrets Eleanor was hiding behind her businesslike smile. As he fell asleep in the softest bed he'd ever felt, one question kept running through his mind. What had he gotten himself into? The morning sun streamed through silk curtains Jake had forgotten to close. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The king-sized bed with its cloud-soft mattress felt nothing like his lumpy twin back home. Then it all came rushing back, the deal, the wedding, Eleanor Blackwood. His new wife, the woman old enough to be his grandmother. A soft knock at the door made Jake pull the sheets up to his chest. Even though he was wearing pajamas Eleanor's staff had laid out for him. Come in, he called, his voice still rough with sleep. A woman in a crisp black uniform entered carrying a silver tray. Good morning, Mr. Calloway. I'm Ms. Winters, the head housekeeper. Breakfast is served. She set the tray across his lap. The meal looked like something from a fancy restaurant. Eggs that weren't just scrambled, bacon cooked just right, and fruits arranged like a picture. Where's Eleanor? Jake asked, awkwardly picking up a fork that felt too delicate for his calloused hands. Mrs. Blackwood has already eaten and left for her morning appointments, Ms. Winters replied coldly. She asked me to inform you that Mr. Peterson will arrive at 10 to measure you for your new wardrobe. Before Jake could ask who Mr. Peterson was, Ms. Winters added, After breakfast, Thomas will show you around the estate. Her eyes narrowed slightly. There are certain areas that are private. Those will be pointed out to you. The way she looked at him made Jake's appetite disappear. She clearly thought he was just after Eleanor's money. Well, he was, but not for himself. For his family. After breakfast, Thomas, a young man about Jake's age but with much softer hands, gave him a tour that took nearly 2 hours. The mansion had 27 rooms, 6 bathrooms, a library filled with books Jake could never hope to read in a lifetime, and artwork that probably cost more than all the cattle his family had ever owned. And this is the East Wing, Thomas said as they walked down a long hallway. Mrs. Blackwood's private quarters are through that door. No one enters without her permission. Jake nodded, but his eyes caught something at the end of the hall. A door with an unusual lock. What's in there? He asked. Thomas's friendly demeanor changed instantly. That room is strictly off-limits. Mrs. Blackwood's orders. Jake wanted to ask more, but Mr. Peterson arrived with measuring tape and fabric samples. The next 3 hours were spent being poked and prodded like a pincushion as the tailor measured him for suits, casual wear, and even swimming trunks for the pool Jake hadn't known existed until that morning. Mrs. Blackwood has requested an entirely new wardrobe for you, Mr. Peterson explained. Something more fitting for a man of your new position. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. Were his old clothes really that bad? Late in the afternoon, Eleanor finally returned. She looked tired, her face paler than it had been at the wedding. When she saw Jake in the living room, she straightened up and the weakness vanished from her eyes. "I see you're settling in," she said, removing her gloves. "There's a dinner party tonight. The Hendersons' important business partners. Your new clothes should arrive in time." Jake cleared his throat. "I called my family today. Wanted to make sure they were okay." Eleanor's face softened for just a second. "Of course. You should invite them for dinner next week." "Really?" Jake hadn't expected that. "This arrangement works best if we appear to be a normal, if unusual couple," Eleanor explained practically. "Family visits would be expected." Just then, Ms. Winters entered the room. "Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Simmons called. "He wants to move tomorrow's appointment earlier." Eleanor's body tensed. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. I'll call him back privately." Jake noticed the concerned look Ms. Winters gave Eleanor. "Is everything okay? Are you sick?" "Just routine checkups," Eleanor replied too quickly. "At my age, doctors fuss over everything." That evening, Jake stood uncomfortably in a new suit that fit him perfectly but felt like a costume. The dinner party was small, just the Hendersons and another couple named the Robertsons, but Jake felt completely out of place. "So tell us, Jake, how did you and Eleanor meet?" Mrs. Henderson asked over dessert. Jake froze. They hadn't prepared a story. "I was having trouble with some of my cattle." Eleanor jumped in smoothly. "Jake helped me solve the problem. His knowledge of ranch management impressed me." "Love at first sight, then?" Mr. Robertson asked with obvious disbelief. "Something like that," Eleanor replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, after the guests had left, Jake found Eleanor in the library with a glass of whiskey. "You handled yourself well," she said, pouring him a glass too. "The first one is always the hardest." Jake took the whiskey, letting the burn steady his nerves. "How many more of these do I have to go to?" "As many as necessary," Eleanor replied. "Tomorrow we have lunch with the mayor." Jake sighed. "This is a lot more public than I expected." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "That's the whole point, Jake. People need to see us together. They need to believe this is real." "Why?" Jake asked. "Why is it so important what people think?" Something flashed in Eleanor's eyes. "Hurt, maybe, or anger. You'll be paid well for your performance. The reasons are my business." The next morning, Jake woke early. Unable to sleep, he decided to explore the grounds. The estate was even bigger than he'd realized. Stables with thoroughbred horses, a small lake, gardens that must have taken an army to maintain. As he passed the garage, he noticed Eleanor's car leaving. It was barely 6 a.m. Where was she going so early? Curious, Jake found Thomas preparing the morning coffee. "Does Eleanor often leave this early?" Thomas hesitated. "Mrs. Blackwood has many business matters to attend to." "Every morning at 6? Jake pressed. "I don't keep track of the mistress's schedule," Thomas replied, but his eyes shifted away. Later that day, after an uncomfortable lunch with the mayor, who clearly thought Jake was a gold digger, Jake wandered into Eleanor's study while she was on a phone call in another room. He hadn't meant to snoop, but a folder labeled estate planning, updated, caught his eye. Inside were legal documents, property transfers, bank account changes. Eleanor was moving her assets around, and recently, all the paperwork was dated within the last month. "What are you doing?" Eleanor's sharp voice made Jake jump. "I was looking for you," he lied, closing the folder. "I wanted to ask about dinner tonight." Eleanor's eyes went to the folder, then back to him. "Dinner is at 7. Ms. Winters will inform the chef of any dietary preferences you have." She walked to her desk and put the folder in a drawer. Locking it with a small key, she then slipped into her pocket. The same pocket that Jake noticed held another key, one that might fit the mysterious locked room in the East Wing. "Is there something wrong with your health?" Jake asked directly. "All these doctor visits, the estate planning." Eleanor's face hardened. "Our arrangement doesn't include sharing personal matters. Remember your place here, Jake." Her words stung more than they should have. After all, this was just business, wasn't it? That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Something was going on with Eleanor, something serious. And whatever it was, it had something to do with their sudden marriage. Restless, he wandered the halls of the mansion. Without planning to, he found himself in the east wing, standing before the locked door. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. Jake pressed his ear to the door but heard nothing. What secrets was Eleanor keeping behind this locked door? And why did he care so much? As he turned to leave, a floorboard creaked. Jake froze, then relaxed when no one appeared. But as he headed back to his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching him. That in this house of secrets, he wasn't the only one looking for answers. The mansion's silent corridors echoed with Jake's boots as the staff watched him warily. Head housekeeper Ms. Winters had particular contempt for him, whispering "gold digger" when she thought he couldn't hear. Eleanor kept disappearing for medical appointments without explanation, returning exhausted. When Jake discovered a locked room in the east wing, Eleanor's usual warmth vanished. "Some doors stay closed, Cowboy," she snapped, pocketing the key. That night, Jake found a mysterious ledger in the library. Properties transferring ownership at an alarming rate, all dated within the next month. Why was Eleanor liquidating her assets so urgently? Glass clinked against the crystal as Jake tugged at his too-tight collar. The Blackwood Charity Gala sparkled around him like something from a dream, or maybe a nightmare. He'd never seen so many diamonds in one room. Ladies with perfect white smiles whispered behind jeweled hands as he passed. 300 rich folks had paid $5,000 each just to eat tiny food and gossip. And here he was, 10 days into his marriage to Eleanor Blackwood, feeling like a coyote that had wandered into a perfume shop. "Smile, darling," Eleanor whispered, squeezing his arm. Despite being 70 years old, she looked striking tonight. Her silver hair was swept up elegantly, and her deep blue dress matched the famous Blackwood sapphires at her throat. "They're all waiting for you to trip up." Jake nodded, trying to stand taller. The new suit Eleanor had bought him cost more than his truck. "I feel like a prize bull at auction." "Nonsense. You're far more handsome," Eleanor replied with a wink that made her look decades younger. "Now, I must speak with the mayor about the children's hospital donation. Can you manage for 10 minutes without me?" Before Jake could answer, she glided away, leaving him stranded in a sea of strangers who all seemed to know exactly who he was. "Drink, sir?" A waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. Jake grabbed a glass gratefully. "Thanks, buddy." The waiter's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Jake feel even more out of place. Great. Even the hired help looked down on him. "So you're the cowboy who lassoed our Eleanor." Jake turned to find an older man with a red face and a sharp suit watching him. The man stuck out his hand. "Senator Williams. I've known Eleanor for 30 years. Jake Calloway." His palm felt sweaty as he shook the senator's hand. "Nice to meet you. Quite a whirlwind romance, I hear." The senator's smile didn't reach his eyes. None of us even knew Eleanor was dating again after her treatments. Jake froze mid-sip. "Treatments? Oh." The senator's eyebrows rose slightly. "I assumed. Well, it's not my place. Eleanor has always been private about personal matters." Jake's stomach tightened. "My wife doesn't keep secrets from me." The senator's laugh was like sandpaper. "My boy, Eleanor Blackwood has been keeping secrets since before you were born. That's how she built her empire." He leaned closer, breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "Quite a miracle worker, aren't you?" Eleanor never mentioned a fiancé during her treatment. Before Jake could demand answers, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A tall man with Eleanor's eyes and a rumpled tuxedo pushed past 2 security guards. "Let go of me. It's my mother's party. For God's sake." The crowd parted like water. Jake watched as Eleanor's face drained of color. "Marcus," she whispered. And Jake realized he was seeing Eleanor's son for the first time. The son she'd barely mentioned, who hadn't even come to their small wedding ceremony. Marcus Blackwood stormed across the ballroom, his movements unsteady. Jake could smell the bourbon from 10 feet away. The band stopped playing. "Mother," Marcus called out too loudly. "Aren't you going to introduce me to my new daddy?" Eleanor's spine straightened. "You're drunk, Marcus. And you're a fool." He turned to scan the crowd until his gaze landed on Jake. There he is, the cowboy who struck gold. Marcus staggered toward Jake, pointing. "Enjoying my inheritance already, cowboy?" Jake stood his ground as Marcus invaded his space. Up close, he could see that Eleanor's son was probably in his 40s, with the puffy, red features of a longtime drinker. His expensive watch and designer tuxedo couldn't hide the shaking in his hands. "Your mother and I are married now," Jake said quietly. "You might want to show some respect." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Respect? For the ranch hand who seduced a sick old woman? Do you even know what you've gotten yourself into, cowboy?" Two security guards approached cautiously. Eleanor stepped between them, her voice low but firm. "That's enough, Marcus. We can discuss this tomorrow when you're sober." "Oh, I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years," Marcus replied. "I just needed to see him for myself." He looked Jake up and down with undisguised contempt. "What did he promise you, mother? Youth? Adventure?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Does he make you feel young again while he waits for you to die?" Jake's fist connected with Marcus's jaw before he even realized he was swinging. Eleanor gasped as her son sprawled backward into a table of champagne glasses that crashed to the marble floor. The room exploded with shocked murmurs. Security guards rushed forward, grabbing Jake's arms. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Get him out!" someone yelled. "No," Eleanor commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Remove my son. Mr. Calloway stays." The guards hesitated, then changed direction, helping Marcus to his feet. "You'll regret this," Marcus slurred as they dragged him toward the exit. "Both of you." Eleanor turned to her guests with a practiced smile. "Please forgive the interruption. The band will continue, and dinner will be served shortly." As conversations cautiously resumed and the music started again, Eleanor touched Jake's arm. "I need some air." They slipped out to the terrace overlooking manicured gardens lit by tiny fairy lights. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the stone balustrade. "I'm sorry," Jake said. "I shouldn't have hit him." "No, you shouldn't have." Eleanor sighed deeply. "But Marcus has been testing my patience for decades. He said you were sick." Eleanor's shoulders stiffened. "Marcus talks too much when he drinks." "Are you?" Jake pressed. "Sick? I mean, everyone is sick at 70, darling." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "A touch of arthritis, high blood pressure. Nothing dramatic." Jake wasn't convinced. Senator Williams mentioned treatments. Eleanor's laugh sounded brittle. "Politicians. Always exaggerating." She patted his cheek. "Now, let's return before people start more rumors." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and small talk. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being hidden from him. He excused himself after dinner, claiming he needed the bathroom, but instead wandered down a quiet hallway. He needed space to think. The hallway opened into another wing of the massive house where the party sounds faded. Jake found himself in what looked like a small study with bookshelves and a desk. A phone rang somewhere nearby, startling him. Jake followed the sound to a room across the hall, where the door stood slightly ajar. A man's voice spoke urgently inside. "I understand patient confidentiality, nurse, but I've been Eleanor's doctor for 15 years. Those test results should have been sent to me directly." Jake froze, knowing he shouldn't eavesdrop but unable to move away. "The new scan shows progression exactly as we feared," the voice continued. 6 months at most if we're lucky. Does her new husband know?" Jake's heart pounded in his chest. 6 months? Eleanor was dying? "Yes. I'll speak with her tonight after the guests leave. Just make sure those medications are delivered tomorrow." Jake backed away from the door, bumping into a small table. A vase wobbled and he caught it just before it fell. When he looked up, the doctor was standing in the doorway, a slender man with silver-rimmed glasses and a concerned expression. "Can I help you?" the doctor asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. Just needed a quiet spot, Jake mumbled. The party's pretty overwhelming. You must be the new Mr. Blackwood. The doctor didn't offer his hand. Dr. Harris. I've treated Eleanor for many years. Jake swallowed hard. Nice to meet you. Eleanor speaks highly of you. Does she? Dr. Harris looked skeptical. And what exactly has she told you about her condition? Before Jake could answer, Eleanor's voice called from down the hall. Jake? Are you out here? Dr. Harris gave Jake a long, measuring look. I think we should continue this conversation another time, with Eleanor present. Jake nodded stiffly and turned to meet his wife, mind racing with questions he wasn't sure how to ask. Eleanor appeared at the end of the hallway, slightly out of breath. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Her smile faltered when she saw Dr. Harris. Lawrence, I didn't realize you two had met. Just introducing ourselves, Dr. Harris said smoothly. We'll catch up after your guests leave. Eleanor's eyes darted between them. Of course. As Dr. Harris walked away, Eleanor linked her arm through Jake's. Come back to the party, darling. People are asking for you. Eleanor, Jake said quietly, we need to talk. Later, she insisted, leading him back toward the noise and light. Tonight is about the children's hospital, not us. The next few hours stretched endlessly as Jake played his part, smiling and nodding while his mind spun with questions. When the last guest finally left around midnight, Eleanor looked exhausted. The sparkle had left her eyes, and Jake noticed for the first time how thin her wrists were, how carefully she moved. Dr. Harris waited in the library with a grim expression. Eleanor shot Jake a look that clearly asked for privacy, but he stood his ground. Whatever you have to say to my wife, you can say to me too. Eleanor sighed. Jake, please. No more secrets, Eleanor. What's going on? Dr. Harris cleared his throat. The new scans confirm what we suspected. The treatments aren't working as hoped. Eleanor sank into a leather chair, suddenly looking every one of her 70 years. How long? 6 months. Perhaps a bit more with aggressive treatment. Jake felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. 6 months until what? Someone tell me what's happening. Cancer, Eleanor said simply. Stage 4 pancreatic with metastasis to the liver. I was diagnosed 8 months ago. 8 months. Jake struggled to process this. Before we even met. Eleanor wouldn't meet his eyes. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Jake's voice rose. Were you ever going to tell me? I wanted to, Eleanor said softly. When the time was right. And when would that be? Jake demanded. At your funeral? Dr. Harris interrupted. There are still options we can discuss. Clinical trials, experimental treatments. No, Eleanor said firmly. We've discussed this. I won't spend my remaining time sick from treatments that only buy weeks. Quality over quantity, Lawrence. Jake paced the room, trying to control his anger. So our marriage, was it just some kind of bucket list item? Marry a younger man before you die. That's hardly fair, Dr. Harris said. It's all right. Eleanor held up her hand. Jake has a right to be upset. She reached into her evening purse and pulled out a small prescription bottle. I need my medication. This day has been too much. As she tried to open the bottle, her hands trembled violently. The bottle slipped from her fingers, scattering pills across the polished floor. Eleanor swayed dangerously, and Jake rushed to catch her as she collapsed. Eleanor, he called, lowering her gently to the sofa. Doctor. Dr. Harris knelt beside her, checking her pulse. She's exhausted herself. Help me get her to bed. Together they carried Eleanor to her bedroom, where the housekeeper, Ms. Winters, waited with obvious concern. Jake paced outside in the hallway while the doctor and Ms. Winters tended to Eleanor. After what felt like hours, Dr. Harris emerged. She's sleeping now. The medication will help her rest. Why didn't anybody tell me? Jake asked, his voice cracking. I'm her husband. Dr. Harris studied him carefully. Eleanor has always been intensely private about her health. And forgive me for saying so, But a marriage of 10 days doesn't compare to decades of friendship and trust. The implication stung. You think I married her for her money, didn't you? Dr. Harris asked bluntly. A struggling cowboy suddenly marries a dying billionaire? The math isn't complicated. Jake stepped closer, his hands clenching into fists. You don't know anything about us. I know Eleanor deserves peace in her final months, Dr. Harris replied evenly. Whether you're part of that peace or just another stress she doesn't need remains to be seen. Before Jake could respond, Ms. Winters emerged from Eleanor's room. She's asking for you, Mr. Calloway. Jake entered the dimly lit bedroom. Eleanor lay against white pillows, looking small and fragile. Her makeup had been removed, revealing age spots and wrinkles usually hidden by expert application. Without her jewelry and fine clothes, she looked like any elderly woman fighting a losing battle. Come sit. She patted the bed beside her. Jake perched awkwardly on the edge. Why, Eleanor? Why marry me if you knew you were dying? Eleanor reached for his hand. Her fingers felt cool and paper-thin. I've lived with death hanging over me for months. I was tired of waiting, tired of pity. Then I met you at that fundraiser. So full of life and passion about saving your family ranch. She smiled faintly. When you told me about your financial troubles, a solution presented itself. So it was just business after all, Jake said bitterly. At first, Eleanor admitted, I needed an heir who wasn't Marcus. Someone who would respect my legacy, who understood hard work and land. You needed money. It seemed perfect. And you didn't think I deserved to know you were dying? Would you have married me if you knew? She asked quietly. Jake looked away, unable to answer. I thought not. Eleanor sighed. I've made my peace with dying, Jake. What I couldn't accept was everything I've built being squandered by Marcus. He's never worked a day in his life. So I'm just a backup plan to spite your son? No. Eleanor squeezed his hand. You're my second chance to do something meaningful with my wealth. To help someone worthy. Jake pulled his hand away. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. Eleanor's voice strengthened. It's an investment in someone I believe in. You remind me of... She trailed off, closing her eyes briefly. Jake waited, but she didn't continue. I remind you of who? He prompted. Someone from long ago, Eleanor said vaguely. It doesn't matter now. Jake stood up, overwhelmed. I need some air. Jake, Eleanor called as he reached the door. I may not have been completely honest, but neither were you. We both entered this marriage with our own agendas. Perhaps we can still make the best of the time that's left. Her words followed him as he strode through the silent house and out into the garden. The night air was cool against his flushed face. Jake dropped onto a stone bench, head in his hands. 6 months. His wife of 10 days had 6 months to live. And she'd known it all along. Jake wasn't sure how long he sat there before he heard footsteps on the gravel path. He looked up, half expecting Eleanor, but instead found Ms. Winters watching him with those judgmental eyes. What do you want? He asked wearily. To understand your intentions, the housekeeper replied. I've served Mrs. Blackwood for 30 years. I won't stand by while you break her heart in her final months. Break her heart. Jake laughed without humor. She lied to me. And you married a woman more than 40 years your senior out of pure love? Ms. Winters raised a skeptical eyebrow. We both know better. Jake couldn't argue with that. Our arrangement was mutually beneficial. Then why are you so angry about her illness? Ms. Winters pressed. If this is just a business deal, her death should be irrelevant to you, as long as the money comes through. The question hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Why was he so upset? He'd gotten exactly what he wanted: financial salvation for his family's ranch. If Eleanor died sooner rather than later, wasn't that actually better for him? The thought made him sick. I'm not a monster, he said quietly. I never wanted her to suffer. Ms. Winters studied him for a long moment. Perhaps there's hope for you yet, Mr. Calloway. She turned to leave, then paused. Eleanor has never been just a rich old woman, you know. In her day, She built an empire from nothing while raising a child alone. She's survived things that would break most people. What things? Jake asked. But Ms. Winters just shook her head. That's her story to tell, not mine, if she chooses to trust you with it. She walked away, adding over her shoulder, "Don't prove her wrong about you." Jake remained in the garden until dawn, wrestling with emotions he couldn't name. When he finally returned to the house, he found Eleanor in her study, already dressed and working despite the early hour. "You didn't sleep," she observed without looking up from her papers. "Neither did you," he countered. Eleanor put down her pen. "Sleep is a luxury I can no longer afford. Too much to do, too little time." Jake noticed the ledger on her desk, the same mysterious ledger he'd glimpsed days earlier. "What are you working on so urgently?" Eleanor hesitated, then pushed the ledger toward him. "See for yourself." Jake flipped through pages of property transfers, stock sales, and asset liquidations. "You're selling everything." "Not everything. Just converting to cash where possible." Eleanor rubbed her temples. "Easier to transfer quickly when the time comes." "To Marcus." "Some," Eleanor admitted. "Despite his flaws, he is my son. But most will go to various foundations. And to you, of course." Jake closed the ledger, uncomfortable. "I didn't marry you to watch you die, Eleanor." "No," she agreed softly. "But that's what will happen anyway." Their eyes met across the desk, an unexpected moment of complete honesty between them. "What do we do now?" Jake asked. Eleanor smiled tiredly. "Now we make the most of whatever time remains. And perhaps," she hesitated, "perhaps we can both stop pretending this is only about money." Before Jake could respond, the phone rang. Eleanor answered, her expression darkening as she listened. "I see. Yes. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" Jake asked. "Marcus," Eleanor said tightly. "He's hired investigators to look into our marriage. He's challenging the will." Jake's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can certainly try." Eleanor rose from her chair with determination. "But I've been preparing for this battle longer than you've been alive, Jake Calloway." She walked to a bookshelf and removed a small key hidden behind a first-edition novel. "There's something I need to show you. Something I should have shown you before we married." Jake followed her through the house to the locked room in the east wing, the one she'd forbidden him from entering. Eleanor's hand shook slightly as she fitted the key into the lock. "Whatever you see in here," she said seriously, "remember that the past is complicated, and people make mistakes for reasons that seem right at the time." The door swung open, revealing not the dark secrets Jake had imagined, but a room filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and mementos. An entire wall was covered with pictures of a ranch that looked strangely familiar. In the center of it all hung a large framed photograph that made Jake's blood run cold. It showed a much younger Eleanor standing beside two men, one of whom was unmistakably Jake's father. "What is this?" Jake whispered, stepping closer to the photo. "How do you know my father?" Eleanor closed the door behind them. "That, Jake, is what Marcus is about to discover, and it changes everything." The sound of shattering glass jolted Jake awake. He shot up from the worn leather chair beside Eleanor's bed, where he'd been keeping watch since her collapse at the gala. His wife of just 10 days lay still beneath silk sheets, her chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The pill bottle that had tumbled from her purse now sat on the nightstand, its medical name too long for Jake to pronounce. "Everything all right in there?" Jake called out, hurrying toward the noise down the hall. He found Mabel, the youngest maid, frantically picking up pieces of a broken vase. Her eyes widened with fear when she saw him approaching. "I'm sorry, Mr. Calloway. I was dusting and—" "It's okay," Jake said, kneeling to help. "And please just call me Jake. Mr. Calloway was my father." Mabel relaxed slightly. "Ms. Winters would have my job for this. Good thing she's in town picking up more medicine." Jake thought about the head housekeeper's cold stares. "Don't worry about her. I won't tell if you won't." As they cleaned up together, Jake noticed Mabel glancing at him curiously. "Something on your mind?" he asked. "It's just—" Mabel hesitated. "You're not what we expected." Jake smiled sadly. "A gold-digging cowboy taking advantage of a rich old lady? Mrs. Blackwood. I mean Mrs. Calloway now. She's been alone so long. When she announced she'd married a man your age." Mabel shrugged. "But you really seem to care about her." "I do," Jake said, surprising himself with how true it felt. In just 10 days, Eleanor had become more than a business arrangement to him. He respected her sharp mind and dry humor. And now, knowing she was sick, possibly dying, left him feeling hollow inside. "There's something you should know," Mabel whispered, looking around nervously. "Ms. Winters had me cleaning the greenhouse yesterday. I found something Mrs. Calloway wouldn't want thrown away." Jake followed Mabel through the sprawling mansion, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting gilded picture frames and antique furniture. The contrast between this palace and his family's modest farmhouse still made Jake's head spin. The greenhouse stood at the far end of the east garden, a cathedral of glass filled with exotic plants. Eleanor spent hours here each day before her health declined. "Behind that big palm tree," Mabel pointed, "there's a loose brick in the wall." After Mabel left, Jake moved the pot and found the brick immediately. It slid out easily, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a leather-bound book with Eleanor, embossed in fading gold letters. Jake's fingers hovered over the journal. This was private. This was wrong. But Eleanor's mysterious past, her connection to his family, the locked room she forbade him to enter, everything pushed him to open the cover. The first pages dated back 15 years, the handwriting elegant and flowing. April 15, 2010. Marcus turns 35 today. I sent a card and check as usual. No response as usual. 15 years of silence from my only son. When did ambition consume everything else in my life? Building this empire cost me the only person who mattered. Jake sat on a stone bench, surrounded by greenery and trickling water from the small fountain. The peaceful setting contrasted with the turmoil in Eleanor's words. He flipped forward several years. September 3, 2013. The specialists at Mayo Clinic confirmed it today. 3 to 5 years at most. I've built everything I touched into gold, but I can't buy more time. All these empty rooms, all this money. For what? For whom? Jake realized Eleanor had known about her illness for much longer than a few months. She'd been carrying this burden alone for years. December 18, 2015 saw him again today. Jack Calloway's boy, Jake. He's grown into a fine young man. So much like his father at that age. Determined, hardworking, kind to animals and people alike. The Calloway ranch is struggling again. I hear whispers in town. History repeats itself. If only pride hadn't stood between Jack and me all those years ago. Jake's heart pounded. Eleanor had known him. Been watching him years before their chance meeting at the livestock auction where she'd first proposed her unusual offer. As he turned the pages, Jake found more entries about himself. March 5, 2022. Jake won the rodeo championship today. I watched from the back row. Nobody knows who the old woman in the big hat is anymore. The Blackwood name means nothing to the younger generation. But I saw his father's strength in him when he stayed on that bull. Jack would be proud. Jake remembered that day clearly. His biggest win, the prize money that kept their ranch afloat for another 6 months. Had Eleanor really been there? July 12, 2023. The drought is destroying the Calloway ranch. Their cattle are thin, their crops failing. Jake works from sunrise past sunset, but nature can't be outworked. I could help, should help, but how? Marcus would see any money movement. And Jack made me promise all those years ago to stay away from his family. Jake's hands trembled. What promise? What history did Eleanor share with his father, who had died 3 years ago? Then came the entry that made his blood run cold. November 28, 2023. The perfect solution came to me today. Marriage. My accountants confirm it would work. Marcus can't block transfers to a legal spouse. The bank will foreclose on the Calloway ranch by spring without help. My time grows shorter. The latest scans showed progression. A marriage of convenience, just long enough to secure Jake's future before I'm gone. He'll hate the idea, of course. Too much pride like his father. But I'll make it sound like I need him more than he needs me. Jake dropped the journal, his mind reeling. Their entire relationship, what he'd thought was a strange but straightforward business arrangement, was built on layers of deception. Eleanor had manipulated him, but seemingly to help him while hiding her true motives. He picked up the journal again, forcing himself to read the most recent entries. February 2nd, 2024. I approached Jake today with my proposal. The shock on his face was almost comical. He thinks I'm a lonely old woman looking for company in my final years. Let him believe that it's kinder than the truth. In time, perhaps I can tell him everything. February 10th, 2024. Wedding day. The look on Marcus's face when I called to tell him, worth every moment of this charade. Jake was kind throughout the ceremony. He tries to hide his discomfort around me, but I see the questions in his eyes. 10 days. The doctors say I have perhaps 6 months. Enough time to make things right? Enough time to finally tell the truth? The final entry was dated just 2 days ago. February 17th, 2024. Pain worse today. Had to increase medication. Jake notices but doesn't pry. Another trait from his father. The charity gala tomorrow will be difficult, but necessary. Marcus will surely make an appearance to challenge the marriage. I need to speak with Dr. Patterson about changing my treatment plan. Time is running short, and there's still so much Jake doesn't know. Jake closed the journal, his mind swimming with questions. As he moved to return it to its hiding place, a faded photograph slipped from between the back pages, falling to the greenhouse floor. The yellowed image showed a much younger Eleanor, perhaps in her late 30s, her arm linked with a handsome cowboy Jake recognized immediately. His father, Jack Calloway. They stood in front of the Calloway ranch house, smiling broadly. At their feet sat a small boy of about 5 with unruly hair and a missing front tooth. Jake himself. He flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink. Jack, Eleanor, and little Jake. The Almost Family. Summer 1999. Almost family? Jake whispered to the empty greenhouse. The crunch of gravel outside alerted him to someone's approach. Jake quickly returned the journal to its hiding place and pocketed the photograph. Ms. Winters appeared at the greenhouse door, her thin frame silhouetted against the morning light. Mrs. Calloway is asking for you, she said coldly. The doctor has arrived. Jake nodded, his mind still processing everything he'd discovered. As he walked back toward the main house, the photograph burned in his pocket like a hot coal. In Eleanor's bedroom, Dr. Patterson was packing his medical bag as Jake entered. The elderly physician had been the Blackwood family doctor for decades, according to Eleanor. Ah, Mr. Calloway, Dr. Patterson said. Your wife is stable for now. I've adjusted her medication, which should help with the pain, but she needs rest. Eleanor sat propped against pillows, looking surprisingly alert. Her silver hair had been brushed and arranged, and someone had helped her apply light makeup. Even dying, she maintained the dignity that had built her cattle empire. There you are, she said, extending a thin hand toward Jake. I was beginning to think you'd run back to your ranch. Just getting some air, Jake replied, taking her hand gently. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. I'll be back tomorrow to check your levels, Eleanor. Call if anything changes. He nodded to Jake and left them alone. Eleanor patted the edge of the bed. Sit with me, Cowboy. We need to talk. Jake perched carefully beside her, the photograph from the journal feeling heavier with each passing second. About what? About why you married me, Eleanor said directly. And don't give me that nonsense about helping a lonely widow in her final years. Jake studied her face, the sharp intelligence in her eyes that age hadn't diminished, the proud set of her jaw. In that moment, he made a decision. Why don't you tell me why you married me instead? He countered, pulling out the photograph and placing it on the bed between them. Eleanor's eyes widened momentarily before her expression settled into resignation. She picked up the photo with trembling fingers. Where did you find this? In your journal, Jake admitted. I know I shouldn't have. You're right. You shouldn't have, Eleanor said sharply. Then her expression softened. But perhaps it's time for truth between us. She traced the outline of Jack Calloway's face in the photograph. Your father was the love of my life, Jake. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. But my mother, Jake began. Sarah was a wonderful woman. Your father loved her very much, Eleanor said quickly. This was before they met. Jake tried to process this information. You and my dad were together for nearly 2 years, Eleanor continued. This was after my husband died, leaving me with Marcus and the beginnings of what would become the Blackwood Empire. Your father worked as my ranch foreman. Why didn't he ever mention you? Pride, Eleanor said simply. When things ended between us, they ended badly. I wanted him to come work for me permanently, to help me build something great. He wanted his own ranch to build his own legacy. Neither of us would bend. And I was, what? Just a child who knew you back then? Jake asked, pointing to his younger self in the photo. Eleanor's eyes took on a faraway look. You adored Jack, followed him everywhere, even before. Before what? Jake pressed. A coughing fit seized Eleanor, cutting off her words. Jake quickly poured water from the bedside pitcher and helped her drink. That's enough for now, he said gently. You need rest. No, Eleanor insisted, gripping his arm with surprising strength. I've waited too long already. You deserve. The bedroom door swung open, and Marcus Blackwood strode in, his expensive suit immaculate, his face flushed with anger. Behind him trailed a nervous-looking man carrying a briefcase. Mother, Marcus said coldly, I see you're well enough for visitors. Good. This is Mr. Reynolds, my attorney. We're here to discuss this sham of a marriage. Jake stood protectively beside Eleanor's bed. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Marcus cut in. Before she gives away my inheritance to a fortune-hunting cowboy. Eleanor squared her shoulders. Marcus, you will speak to my husband with respect in my house. Your house? Marcus laughed bitterly. The house my father built? The empire his money started? And now you're giving it to him. He pointed accusingly at Jake. You know nothing about what I'm doing or why, Eleanor said. Her voice, though weak, carried authority. I know enough, Marcus spat. Mr. Reynolds has been investigating your new husband. Shall we talk about how convenient it is that you married just days before changing your will? Jake looked at Eleanor in surprise. You changed your will? Eleanor's face remained impassive. My attorney will be arriving shortly. We can discuss all of this like civilized people. Marcus stepped closer. Did he know about the cancer before he married you? Did he know you have months, not years? Tell me, Cowboy, what's the price tag on your dignity? Jake's fists clenched, but he remained still. I suggest you leave now, before you say something you'll regret. Oh, there's plenty I regret, Marcus said bitterly, like not challenging her mental competence the moment I heard about this farce. That's enough. Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. Marcus, wait downstairs. Jake, please give us a moment. Jake hesitated, not wanting to leave her alone with her furious son. It's all right, Eleanor assured him. This conversation is 15 years overdue. Reluctantly, Jake left the room, the mysterious photograph still clutched in his hand. As he closed the door, he heard Eleanor say, Marcus, there's something you need to know about Jake Calloway. Jake stood in the hallway, torn between respect for Eleanor's privacy and the burning need to know what connection tied him to the Blackwood family. What secret was Eleanor finally ready to reveal? And why had his father never spoken of his relationship with one of the wealthiest women in the state? The locked room in the East Wing caught his attention again. If answers existed, perhaps they waited behind that forbidden door. Jake made his decision. While Eleanor and Marcus had their long overdue conversation, he would find the key and uncover the truth for himself. He headed toward Eleanor's study, where he'd seen her hide the key that first night. Whatever secret connected him to Eleanor Blackwood, whatever reason she'd chosen him for this strange marriage, He would discover it today. 10 days after saying "I do" to a dying woman, Jake Calloway was finally ready to learn why she'd really chosen him. The morning light cut sharp lines across Jake's tired face as he paced outside Ms. Winter's small cottage at the edge of the Blackwood property. His hands shook, not from the cold but from what he'd seen in Eleanor's journal. Names, dates, and places that made no sense yet seemed oddly familiar danced in his head. He knocked firmly, the sound echoing in the quiet dawn. Ms. Winters opened the door, her usual stern expression softening when she saw his troubled face. "I wondered when you'd come," she said simply, stepping aside to let him in. The cottage was modest but warm, filled with photos of the Blackwood family through decades. Eleanor young and smiling, Marcus as a boy, and strangely, tucked in the corner, what looked like Jake's father in his younger days. "You know why I'm here," Jake said. Not a question but a statement. "Eleanor's journal mentioned my father. There's a picture of them together at our ranch. And there's more things that don't add up. You've been with her for 40 years. You know the truth." Ms. Winters sighed, her shoulders dropping as if a heavy weight pressed down on them. She moved to her small kitchen, putting on a kettle. "Some truths need tea," she said quietly. Jake couldn't sit, his cowboy boots wearing a path on her worn rug. "I don't need tea. I need answers. Eleanor's sick. Dying. And there's some connection to my family that nobody bothered to tell me about." "Your father never told you?" Ms. Winters turned, genuine surprise on her face. "Not even when you married her?" When Jake shook his head, she let out a low whistle. "Lord have mercy. You really don't know." "Know what?" Jake's voice cracked with frustration. Ms. Winters gestured to a photo album on her shelf. "Bring that here, boy." Jake grabbed it, dropping it onto her kitchen table with more force than he intended. Ms. Winters opened it with careful hands, turning to a page near the middle. There, in faded color, stood a young Eleanor, beautiful, fierce, and radiant, beside a handsome man Jake recognized as his father 30 years younger. They were business partners, Ms. Winters began, her finger tracing the edge of the photo. "More than that, really. Your father worked this land when old Mr. Blackwood still ran things. Best ranch hand they ever had. Eleanor was being groomed to take over the business, but she had dreams of modernizing, expanding. Your father had the same vision." The kettle whistled, and Ms. Winters rose to pour 2 cups of tea. Jake didn't touch his. "When old Mr. Blackwood died, Eleanor inherited everything. She and your father started working together, building what would become the Blackwood cattle empire. They were quite a pair, her money and his know-how." Ms. Winters took a sip of tea, her eyes distant with memory. "And they fell in love." Jake's throat went dry. "But my mother." "Not yet in the picture," Ms. Winters cut in. "This was before. Eleanor and your father were going to merge their operations. They were planning to marry." Jake slumped into a chair, struggling to process this information. "What happened?" "The drought of '92 happened. Worst in a century. Hit everyone hard, but your family's ranch suffered most. Eleanor offered to help, to save your family's land, but your grandfather was a proud man. Too proud." Ms. Winters shook her head. "He forbade your father from taking Blackwood charity, said he'd rather lose the ranch than be indebted to Eleanor. My grandfather died when I was little. I barely remember him. Stubborn to the end," Ms. Winters confirmed. "Your father was torn between loyalty to his family and his love for Eleanor. In the end, he chose family." Jake rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of this revelation. "But that doesn't explain the connection to me, or why Eleanor would marry me now after all these years." Ms. Winters reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Jake's. "There's more, Jake. Much more." She hesitated. "Your father didn't just leave Eleanor. He left her when she was carrying a child." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Jake gripped the edge of the table. "What are you saying? Your father met your mother or the woman you knew as your mother shortly after. They married quickly. Too quickly, some said." Ms. Winters' eyes were sad but direct. "You were born 7 months after their wedding. But nobody questioned it. or if they did, they kept it to themselves. Jake stood up so fast he knocked over his untouched tea. That's not possible. My mother died giving birth to me. Everyone's told me that my whole life. The woman who died in childbirth was giving birth to your sister, who also didn't survive. You were already 3 years old. Ms. Winter's voice was gentle but firm. Your father and his new wife raised you as their own. I think they truly came to believe it themselves over time. Jake staggered back, memories fracturing and reforming. The lack of baby pictures. The way his father could never talk about his birth without changing the subject. The strange comments from old-timers at the feed store about how he had blackwood eyes. No, he whispered. That would mean. You need to look in Eleanor's study, Ms. Winters said, rising slowly. In the locked drawer of her mahogany desk. The key is in a false bottom of the blue vase. She keeps all the papers there. Jake was already heading for the door when Ms. Winters called after him. Jake! She never stopped loving either of you, your father or you. Even when she married Marcus's father, even when she built her empire. Everything she did was to make sure you'd be taken care of someday. Jake barely heard her, his boots pounding the gravel as he ran back toward the main house. The morning sun now high and harsh, exposing everything in its unforgiving light. Inside the mansion, he moved like a man possessed, ignoring the startled looks from the staff. Eleanor was still asleep, her medication ensuring she wouldn't wake for hours. The study door was unlocked. Eleanor had grown to trust him in their short marriage. The blue vase stood on a shelf, innocent and decorative. Jake appended it, finding the false bottom just as Ms. Winters had described. A small key tumbled out. His hands trembled as he approached the mahogany desk. The locked drawer opened smoothly, revealing a stack of folders and papers, meticulously organized. Birth certificates, legal documents, letters. Jake pulled out the top folder, opening it with shaking hands. Inside was an original birth certificate. Jacob Thomas Blackwood, born to Eleanor Blackwood and Thomas Calloway. No, Jake whispered again, but there it was in black and white. His birth date, the same he'd always known, but a different name, a different mother. He stumbled upon another document. Adoption papers, showing that Thomas and Sarah Calloway had legally adopted him when he was nearly 3 years old. Medical records showed Sarah had indeed been pregnant at the time of the adoption but had lost both herself and the baby during childbirth. In his grief, Thomas had apparently decided to raise Jake as if he'd been Sarah's child all along, erasing Eleanor from the story completely. A letter caught his eye, dated just after his supposed birth, written in Eleanor's elegant hand but never sent. My dearest Thomas, I understand your choice, though it breaks my heart. Your family comes first. It always has. I want you to know I don't blame you for choosing them over us. Your father needs you, and the ranch is your legacy. Our son will want for nothing. Marcus's father has agreed to the marriage, and my condition was that Jacob be provided for from afar. He will never know the truth, but he will never suffer. I've set up a trust that will ensure the Calloway Ranch survives any hardship, though it will come through channels you'll never connect to me. All I ask is that you love him. Love him enough for both of us. Forever yours, Eleanor. Jake sat heavily in Eleanor's chair, the letter clutched in his hand. Tears blurred his vision as pieces clicked into place. The mysterious loans that had saved their ranch during drought years. The college scholarship that had appeared when his father couldn't afford tuition. The buyer who purchased their cattle at above-market prices when times were tough. Eleanor had been there all along, watching from a distance, making sure he was cared for. A photo slipped from between the papers. Eleanor holding a baby, her face both joyful and heartbroken. On the back, in the same elegant handwriting, Jacob's first birthday. My beautiful boy. Jake laid his head on the desk and wept. For the mother he never knew he had. For the woman who had loved him from afar for 30 years. For the strange twist of fate that had brought them together in these final months of her life. The sound of a teacup rattling made him look up. In the doorway stood Ms. Winters, her face solemn. She visited your ranch every year on your birthday, she said quietly. watched from her car as you grew up. Never interfered, never revealed herself. Just needed to see you were okay. Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Why tell me now? Why this elaborate scheme with the marriage? Marcus's father died 5 years ago. The prenuptial agreement that forbade her from contacting you expired with him. She's been planning how to approach you ever since. Ms. Winters moved into the room, straightening papers with familiar ease. Then came her diagnosis. 6 months, maybe less. She panicked. Needed to find a way to make sure you'd be taken care of when she was gone. The marriage, Jake said, understanding dawning. A way to give me half her fortune without raising questions. Ms. Winters nodded. She intended to tell you the truth gradually. Let you get to know her first, maybe even care for her a little. She was afraid if you knew from the start, you'd think it was just about money or guilt. And Marcus? Does he know about me? No. He knows his father wasn't her great love, but not about you specifically. Ms. Winters sighed. That storm is still coming. Jake stood up, gathering the documents. His mind raced with 30 years of rewritten history. The father he'd loved and lost 3 years ago had kept this secret his entire life. The mother he'd never known had been watching over him all along. And now she was dying, just when he'd found her. She'll be awake soon, Ms. Winters said. Her medication wears off around noon. Jake nodded, unable to form words. What will you do? Ms. Winters asked softly. Jake looked down at the birth certificate in his hands. Jacob Thomas Blackwood, son of Eleanor, son of Thomas, a cowboy and an heiress, the poor ranch hand and the rich woman. His entire identity had shifted in a matter of hours. I don't know, he admitted. How do you face the woman who gave birth to you, gave you up, watched you from afar your whole life, then married you before telling you the truth? Ms. Winters placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. With forgiveness, I hope. She's made mistakes, but loving you was never one of them. Jake carefully returned the documents to the drawer, keeping only the letter and the photo. As he walked toward Eleanor's bedroom, his mind flooded with questions. Would he tell her he knew? Would he rage at her for the deception or thank her for the silent support throughout his life? Could he find it in himself to be her son for the brief time she had left? The answers wouldn't come easily. Nothing about this situation would be simple. But as he approached her door, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The woman sleeping in that room was not just his wife of 10 days. She was his mother. And somehow, against all odds, they'd been given a chance to know each other before it was too late. The door to Eleanor's bedroom loomed before him, both a barrier and a gateway to a truth 30 years in the making. Jake took a deep breath, tucked the photo into his shirt pocket right above his heart, and knocked softly. Come in, called Eleanor's frail voice. Jake's hand hesitated on the doorknob. In this moment, balanced between his past and future, he realized the most bizarre truth of all. He had married his own mother, and yet it wasn't as wrong as it sounded. It was, in its own twisted way, a chance to set things right. He pushed open the door to face the woman who had given him life twice, once at birth, and again by saving the only home he'd ever known. Eleanor sat propped against pillows, morning light giving her aged face a golden glow. When she saw him, his eyes, he now realized, lit up with that same mixture of love and sorrow he'd seen in the photograph. Good morning, my dear husband, she said, her voice carrying a weight that Jake now understood. Jake moved to her bedside, taking her fragile hand in his. The wedding ring he'd placed there 10 days ago caught the light. How strange that this symbol of their false marriage would become the bridge to their true relationship. Eleanor, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I think it's time we talked about my father, and about why you really married me. Her eyes widened, fear and relief battling across her features. Then slowly she nodded. Yes, she whispered. I believe it is. Outside the window, the vast Blackwood estate stretched toward the horizon, meeting the smaller Calloway ranch in the distance. 2 pieces of land separated by fences and decades of secrets, finally coming together through the truth that flowed between mother and son. The heavy oak doors of Eleanor's mansion burst open with a bang that echoed through the marble entryway. Marcus Blackwood stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled from travel, his face red with fury, and a thick folder of legal papers clutched in his white-knuckled grip. The peaceful afternoon that Jake had been spending with Eleanor, learning about her childhood on her father's first small ranch, shattered like glass. "Mother!" Marcus bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Call your guard dogs off. Your staff tried to keep me out of my own family home." Jake rose from the sofa slowly, placing himself between the angry man and Eleanor, who remained seated but straightened her spine. The housekeeper, Ms. Winters, appeared at the doorway with worry etched across her face. "It's all right, Vivian," Eleanor said calmly. "My son has every right to visit, though his manners seem to have abandoned him." Marcus stormed into the living room, tossing the legal papers onto the antique coffee table with such force that Eleanor's teacup rattled in its saucer. "You think I didn't investigate this sham? This marriage is fraud." His finger jabbed toward Jake. This cowboy suddenly appears and marries my sick mother 10 days ago? The timing is suspicious to anyone with half a brain." Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "You might want to watch your tone when speaking to your mother." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Oh, now he's protective. How touching. How much is she paying you for this performance, ranch hand? Did you even know she's dying?" The room went still. Jake turned to Eleanor, whose face had gone pale but whose eyes remained steady. She hadn't told him. Not in so many words, but the pills, the doctor visits, her tiredness. He'd suspected something serious. "Marcus, please sit down," Eleanor said softly. "I will not sit down. I have divorce papers, evidence of coercion, and proof that this marriage was arranged under duress. No judge in the country will let this gold digger take what belongs to the Blackwood family." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "Belongs to you, you mean?" Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "Everything I've built, everything I've earned. You believe it's already yours." Jake watched the mother and son face off, feeling like an intruder in a battle that had begun decades before he entered the picture. Yet something about Marcus's rage seemed almost childlike, the tantrum of a boy who felt cheated, not the calculated anger of a man concerned about money alone. "You gave me nothing while I was growing up except your absence and your disappointment," Marcus spat. "And now you'll give everything to a stranger?" Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, her small frame somehow filling the room. For a moment, Jake saw the formidable businesswoman who had built an empire from a struggling cattle operation, the woman other ranchers feared at auctions and negotiations. "It's time both of you knew the truth," she said. Ms. Winters stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, your medication." "Not now, Vivian." Eleanor cut her off, her eyes never leaving the two men. "Some truths can't wait for convenient timing." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked heavily as Eleanor walked to the mantel and picked up a silver-framed photograph, her wedding picture with Jake. She held it gently, then set it down to pick up another. Marcus as a young boy sitting stiffly beside her. "You had everything, Marcus, the best boarding schools, trust funds, my constant attention whenever I wasn't working to build something that would secure your future. And still, somehow, you grew to resent me." Her voice trembled slightly. "And you resented the idea of the ranch boy I gave away even more, though you never knew him by name." Jake felt the floor shift beneath his boots. "What did you say?" he asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Marcus looked between them, confusion momentarily replacing his anger. "What ranch boy? What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "Before your father, Marcus, I loved a man who worked this land. Your grandfather didn't approve. A cattle empress didn't marry the help. When I became pregnant, your grandfather threatened to disown me, to leave me penniless." She turned to Jake. "I was young and scared. I gave my baby to the man I loved, who married quickly afterward. They raised my son as their own, and I married Marcus's father instead." Jake stumbled backward until his legs hit the sofa. The room spun around him as pieces clicked together. Eleanor's strange interest in his failing ranch, her tears at their wedding, the familiar way she sometimes looked at him. "No," he whispered. "My mother died in childbirth. My father always told me." "Your father protected you from the truth," Eleanor said. "From the scandal, from the pain of knowing your mother had chosen money and position over keeping you." Marcus's face had drained of color. "This is absurd. You're making this up to justify this ridiculous marriage." Eleanor walked to her desk and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small key from her necklace. She withdrew a yellowed envelope and handed it to Marcus. "Your father knew. It was part of our marriage arrangement, that I would never speak of my first child, that I would be a proper mother to his heir." Marcus snatched the envelope and pulled out birth records, letters, and a faded photograph of a much younger Eleanor holding a newborn. His hands trembled as he read. All these years, Marcus's voice had lost its edge. The ranch visits, the strange interest in that failing property in the valley. It wasn't about land expansion at all, was it? Eleanor shook her head, then turned to Jake, who stood frozen. "I never stopped watching over you from a distance. When I heard about your financial troubles, I saw a chance to help you without revealing everything. The marriage was meant to be an arrangement, a way to secure your inheritance legally before I—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Before you die," Jake completed flatly. "Yes," she admitted. "I have 6 months, perhaps less. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The room fell silent again as the three of them absorbed the weight of these revelations. Jake felt like he was drowning, his entire identity shifting beneath him. Eleanor Blackwood wasn't just his elderly wife of convenience. She was his mother. The woman he'd believed dead for 28 years had been alive, wealthy, watching from afar. "I'm making amends before I die," Eleanor continued. "I've already changed my will. My estate will be divided equally between both my sons." Marcus's shock transformed back into rage so quickly that Jake barely had time to register the change before Marcus grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from the desk. "Both sons?" Marcus snarled. "You think you can rewrite history, bring in some cowboy you abandoned, and suddenly we're one big happy family sharing the Blackwood fortune?" Ms. Winters moved toward the door. "I'll call security." "Don't," Jake said sharply. "This needs to happen." Eleanor stood tall despite her frail frame. "I've made my decision, Marcus. Half to you, half to Jake. The brother you never knew you had." "He is not my brother," Marcus shouted, his face contorted. "And you are not the mother I thought you were." Without warning, Marcus lunged toward Eleanor, his arm raised with the paperweight. Jake moved instinctively, throwing himself between them. The heavy crystal came down, missing its intended target, but catching Jake across the temple. Hot pain blazed through his head as he stumbled, knocking into the side table where the family portraits sat. The frames toppled, glass shattering as they hit the hardwood floor. Blood trickled down Jake's face as he steadied himself against the wall. Marcus stood frozen, the paperweight still in his hand, a look of horror replacing his anger as he stared at the blood on Jake's face. "Oh my God," he whispered, dropping the makeshift weapon with a heavy thud. "I didn't mean to." Eleanor had rushed to Jake's side, her small hands pressing a handkerchief to his wound. "Vivian, call Dr. Patterson immediately." Jake pushed away from the wall, ignoring the spinning room. "I'm fine. It's just a cut." But the blood soaked through the white cloth quickly. Security personnel appeared at the doorway, summoned by the commotion. They looked uncertainly between Marcus and Jake, waiting for instructions. "Nobody touches my son," Eleanor said firmly, still holding the cloth to Jake's head. Then she looked pointedly at Marcus. "Either of my sons." Marcus backed away, looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The rage had drained from him, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. "I was aiming for the wall," he said quietly. "I swear I wasn't trying to hit anyone." Jake nodded slightly, wincing at the pain it caused. He believed him. The look in Marcus's eyes wasn't cold calculation. It was the wild grief of a man whose entire world had just been upended. "I think," Jake said carefully, "that we all need some time to process this." The family doctor arrived within 20 minutes, stitching the gash on Jake's face in Eleanor's study while she watched anxiously. Marcus had retreated to the guest house on the property, unwilling to leave but unable to remain in the same room. The broken family portrait lay on the desk beside them, the glass removed, the photograph itself undamaged except for a crease across the middle that separated Eleanor from her husband and Marcus. 7 stitches, Dr. Patterson announced, cutting the thread. Keep it clean, and come see me in a week to remove them. When they were alone again, Jake stared at Eleanor. This stranger who was his employer, his wife, and now, apparently, his birth mother. The silence stretched between them. I should have told you from the beginning, Eleanor finally said. But I was afraid you'd reject me, and perhaps I deserved that. Jake touched the bandage on his face gingerly. My whole life was built on a lie. Not entirely, Eleanor said softly. Your father, the man who raised you, he loved you as his own. That was never a lie. Outside the window, Jake could see Marcus sitting alone on a garden bench, his head in his hands. And him? Jake asked. Did you ever tell him he had a brother? Eleanor shook her head. Marcus grew up lonely. I thought knowing would only hurt him more. Jake laughed without humor. Well, he knows now. The sun was setting over the property, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. In the orange light, Jake could see the resemblance between himself and Marcus that he'd missed before. The same strong jawline, the same way of holding their shoulders. What happens now? Jake asked. Eleanor sighed deeply. That depends on both of you. I can't undo the past. I can't give either of you back the brotherhood you might have had. But I can try to make the future right. Jake stood and walked to the window, watching his newly discovered half-brother sitting alone in the fading light. He has every right to hate me, to hate us both. Yes, Eleanor agreed. But hate isn't the only possible response to pain. Jake touched the wedding band on his finger, the symbol of an arrangement that had transformed into something far more complicated than a business deal. He had come to this house looking for financial salvation, only to find his entire history rewritten. I need to talk to him, Jake said suddenly. Alone. Eleanor looked alarmed. After what just happened. Jake, he's volatile right now. So am I, Jake interrupted. But we're brothers, apparently. And brothers fight sometimes. Without waiting for her response, Jake left the study and headed toward the garden. Marcus didn't look up as Jake's boots crunched on the gravel path, but his shoulders tensed. If you've come for round 2, Marcus said without raising his head, I should warn you I was the boxing champion at boarding school. Jake sat on the opposite end of the bench. Noted, but I think we've both drawn enough blood for one day. The evening crickets began their chorus as the two men sat in silence. Above them, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Did you know? Marcus finally asked. Before today? About being her son? No. Jake touched his bandaged face. That was as much a surprise to me as it was to you. Marcus nodded slowly. I believe you. He paused. I'm sorry about your face. I'm sorry about your mother. Finding out she kept a secret this big can't be easy. Marcus looked at him directly for the first time. You look like her, you know? Around the eyes. Jake had never seen the resemblance before, but now that Marcus mentioned it, he could picture it. The same deep-set eyes, the same way of squinting slightly when thinking hard about something. For what it's worth, Jake said carefully, I didn't marry her for her money. Not exactly. I married her to save my family ranch, which turns out to be land that was once partly hers anyway. Marcus gave a short, bitter laugh. The ironies just keep piling up, don't they? He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, messing it up in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. She never told me she was sick either. Cancer, she said. Jake nodded. Stage 4 pancreatic. Terminal. Christ. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. All these years of stiff phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. I always thought there'd be time to fix things between us someday. From the main house, they could see Eleanor watching them from the study window, her slight figure illuminated by the lamp behind her. Maybe there still is time, Jake suggested quietly. Not as much as you hoped, but some. Marcus stared at his mother's silhouette. Do you hate her? For giving you away? For marrying my father instead of yours? Jake considered the question seriously. I don't know yet. I think I need time to figure that out. He glanced at Marcus. Do you hate me? For suddenly appearing and becoming her heir? I don't know you well enough to hate you specifically, Marcus admitted. But I've resented the idea of you all my life without realizing it. The perfect ghost child she gave up, who somehow got more of her heart than I ever did. The brutal honesty of the statement hung in the air between them. Neither man knew how to be brothers. They had 30 years of separate lives and only 10 minutes of shared history. What if, Jake suggested slowly, we called a truce? Not for forever, just for now. While we figure out what all this means. Marcus looked skeptical. A truce? Yeah. No lawyers, no fighting over the will. No more throwing heavy objects at each other's heads. Just time to get to know the mother you've always had, and the mother I never knew I had, before it's too late. The evening had grown chilly, and lights were coming on in the main house. Ms. Winters appeared at the garden door, watching them warily. And afterward? Marcus asked. When is she gone? Jake didn't have an answer for that. The future beyond Eleanor's illness was a hazy, uncertain thing. Would they remain connected, these accidental brothers brought together by a deathbed revelation? Or would they drift back to being strangers once their shared link was gone? I guess we figure that out when we get there, Jake said finally. Marcus extended his hand cautiously. Temporary truce, then. Jake hesitated only briefly before shaking it. The grip was formal, nothing like the easy camaraderie of true brothers. But it was a beginning. As they walked back toward the house side by side, keeping a careful distance between them, the question hung unspoken in the air. Would blood prove thicker than the fortune that had divided it for decades? The sun broke through storm clouds as Jake rushed into Eleanor's bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. Doc Williams had called at dawn with urgent news. Eleanor's condition had taken a sudden turn. Jake found her pale against the white sheets, her breath shallow, but her eyes sparked with life when she saw him. There you are, Cowboy, she whispered, her voice thin as paper. I was beginning to think you'd run off. Jake pulled a chair close to her bed, the wood scraping against the floor. Not a chance, Eleanor. Told you I'd stick around for better or worse. Didn't I? That very day, Jake moved his own bed into Eleanor's massive bedroom. The staff raised their eyebrows but kept quiet as he dragged in the smaller mattress, placing it beside her grand four-poster bed. Eleanor watched him with tired eyes as he worked. You don't have to do this, she said. I know, Jake replied, tucking in the sheets. Want to, though. The huge room seemed smaller with both of them there. Jake hung his old cowboy hat on one of the fancy bedposts, looking out of place among Eleanor's fine things. But he didn't care how it looked. Something had changed between them after the truth came out. Something deeper than marriage papers or hidden secrets. Ms. Winters brought up a box of old photos at Eleanor's request. As the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, mother and son spread pictures across the bed. Jake's fingers shook when he picked up a faded snapshot of himself at age 6, riding his first pony. How did you get this? He asked. Eleanor's smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. I paid the photographer at the county fair that day. I have a picture from every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation. I never stopped watching over you. Jake blinked back hot tears. You were there the whole time? In the shadows? Always, Eleanor said, her hand trembling as she touched a photo of Jake winning his first rodeo ribbon. Your father would send me word when something big was happening. I'd slip into town, watch from a distance, then disappear before you could spot me. Jake stared at her, trying to remember strangers at his school events, his competitions, his life's big moments. Had he ever noticed the elegant older woman watching from afar? Had he ever felt her eyes on him? Why didn't you ever say anything? All those years. Eleanor's face clouded with pain that wasn't just physical. Your father and I agreed it was best. Marcus's father had such power over me then. If he'd known about you, he would have ruined your family completely. She picked up another photo. Jake at 18, graduating high school. By the time I was free of him, you were grown. I feared you'd hate me for giving you up. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 4 as they continued through the photographs. Jake discovered his mother had tracked not just the big events but small ones too. His first blue ribbon at the state fair. The day he broke his arm falling off the barn roof. The afternoon he taught the neighbors' kids to ride. I felt like I knew you, Eleanor said softly, even though you didn't know me. That evening, as the sun began to set, Jake had an idea. He excused himself and hurried down to the stables, where he saddled Thunderbolt, his favorite chestnut quarter horse. The stable hands watched curiously as Jake led the horse across the manicured lawn, right up to the east wing of the mansion. "What in tarnation are you doing?" called out the head gardener, who was pruning roses nearby. "Bringing Eleanor a visitor," Jake answered, guiding the gentle horse right up to the big bay window of Eleanor's bedroom. When he tapped on the glass, Eleanor's mouth fell open in surprise. Jake pushed the window wide, and Thunderbolt stuck his head in, nickering softly. "You brought your horse to my bedroom?" Eleanor laughed, the sound rusty but real. "You mentioned yesterday that you missed riding. Figured if you can't get to the stable could come to you." Eleanor's wrinkled hand reached out to stroke Thunderbolt's velvety nose. The horse snorted softly, blowing warm air on her fingers. For a moment, she looked young again, her eyes bright, her smile wide and genuine. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's yours too now," Jake said. "Everything of mine is yours." As the evening shadows grew longer, Jake settled into reading Eleanor's favorite book to her. Her breathing had grown more labored, and Doc Williams had left more pain medicine for the night. They both knew time was running short. A commotion downstairs broke their quiet moment. Ms. Winters burst into the room without knocking, her usually perfect hair escaping its pins. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Marcus is here, with children." Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. "Marcus? Here? And he brought your grandchildren, ma'am. He's asking to see you." Jake looked at Eleanor, her face a storm of emotions. "Do you want me to send them away?" She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No, please, let them come up." Jake nodded to Ms. Winters, who disappeared back down the stairs. The minutes ticked by on the antique clock as they waited in tense silence. Then footsteps sounded on the stairs, growing louder as they approached. Marcus appeared in the doorway first, looking less angry than the last time they'd seen him. Behind him stood a pretty woman with kind eyes, his wife Jenny, Jake guessed, and 3 children ranging from about 4 to 10 years old. The youngest, a little girl with Eleanor's blue eyes, clutched a stuffed horse to her chest. "Mother," Marcus said stiffly, "you look." His voice trailed off as he took in her frail appearance. "Terrible," Eleanor finished for him with a weak smile. "No need to sugarcoat it." Marcus cleared his throat. "These are your grandchildren. Amy is 10, James is 7, and little Emma just turned 4 last month." The children hung back shyly until Emma, the youngest, broke free from her mother's hand and approached the bed. She held up her stuffed horse. "Daddy says you have real horses," she said, her voice small but clear. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sweetheart, many horses. And your Uncle Jake here is wonderful with them." Emma looked at Jake with new interest. "You're my uncle?" Jake knelt down to her level. "Seems that way, Miss Emma. And I bet those horses would love to meet you tomorrow." Marcus stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "I didn't come here to fight, Mother. I came because—" He glanced at his children, then back at Eleanor. "They should know their grandmother, even if just once." The words hung in the air, an olive branch in a war that had raged for decades. Eleanor reached out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus took it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing them." The evening unfolded in an unexpected way. Jenny produced a picnic basket full of food, and they all ate dinner right there in Eleanor's bedroom. The children gradually lost their shyness, with little Emma climbing right onto the bed to show Eleanor her favorite book. Marcus remained quiet but watchful, his eyes taking in the photos spread across the bed, the way Jake moved naturally around the room, caring for his mother. As the children were finally tiring out, Eleanor began telling them stories about the ranch when it was young wild mustangs running free, cattle drives under starlit skies, and brave cowboys who faced down lightning storms to save their herds. The children listened with wide eyes, even Amy, who had initially declared herself too old for baby stories. "Those cowboys sound like princes," Emma murmured sleepily. "Better than princes," Eleanor said, winking at Jake. "Cowboys keep their promises." It was nearly midnight when Jenny gathered the sleepy children. "We should let you rest," she said gently to Eleanor. "We're staying at the Pine Grove Inn in town. Perhaps we could come back tomorrow." "Stay here," Jake said suddenly. "The house has plenty of room. East Wing has 5 empty bedrooms." Marcus looked surprised at the offer. "This isn't your house too." "Yes, it is," Eleanor interrupted. "It's Jake's home now too. And yours if you want it to be again." A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Marcus nodded once, a quick jerk of his head. "We'll stay. Just for tonight." After they left to get settled in their rooms, Eleanor sank back against her pillows, exhausted but smiling. "Did you see Emma's eyes? Just like my mother's. The blackwood blue." "She's got your spirit too," Jake said, adjusting Eleanor's pillows. "Marched right up to you without a hint of fear." Eleanor's smile faded as she clutched Jake's hand. "I've missed so much. With you. With them." "We're here now," Jake said firmly. "That's what matters." As he helped Eleanor take her evening medicine, she grew serious. "Jake, if I don't have much time left, don't talk like that. Listen to me," she insisted. "If these are my last days, I want you to know I'm grateful. Not just for these days, but for the man you've become without me. You're everything I could have hoped for in a son." Jake couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her forehead gently, the way he imagined she might have done to him as a baby, in those brief moments before she gave him up. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, Jake settled into the chair beside her bed, unwilling to leave her side. The house creaked and settled around them, a century of Blackwood history in its walls. Outside, the horses nickered softly in their stables. For the first time since coming to this grand house, Jake felt like he belonged. In the darkest hour before dawn, Eleanor woke suddenly, her body jerking upright. Her eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. "Eleanor!" Jake jumped up. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Her limbs began to shake violently, her head thrashing from side to side. Jake lunged for the emergency bell, pulling it hard enough to break the cord. "Help!" he shouted, his voice echoing down the hallway. "Somebody help!" Ms. Winters appeared in seconds, her face pale with shock. "Seizure," she said grimly. "Call the doctor now." Jake ran for the phone as Marcus appeared in the doorway, awakened by the shouting. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Eleanor's having a seizure," Jake called over his shoulder as he dialed. "Get the kids away from here." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Doc Williams arrived in record time, his ancient truck spitting gravel as he drove up. The bedroom filled with people, the doctor, Ms. Winters, Jake, and eventually Marcus, who had made sure the children were safely with Jenny in the far wing. When Eleanor finally stabilized, the seizure passing like a terrible storm, Doc Williams pulled Jake and Marcus into the hallway. His face was grim in the dim light. "Boys, I won't sugarcoat this. That seizure was severe. Her system is shutting down faster than we expected." He put a hand on each of their shoulders. "Days at most, I'd say. Maybe hours." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He leaned against the wall, feeling the solid surface hold him up when his legs wanted to give way. "There's nothing you can do?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. Doc Williams shook his head. "Keep her comfortable. Be with her. That's all any of us can do now." When they returned to the bedroom, Eleanor was awake again, her eyes clear but tired. Ms. Winters had combed her hair and helped her into a fresh nightgown. She looked small against the pillows but somehow regal still. "Well," she said weakly, "I suppose the cat's out of the bag now. No more pretending I'm going to beat this." Jake sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. "Eleanor." "Mother," she corrected gently. "If I'm going to die soon, I'd like to hear you call me mother at least once." Jake swallowed hard. "Mother," he said, the word strange and wonderful on his tongue. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. If anyone can beat this—" "Hush," she said, squeezing his hand. "Some fights aren't meant to be won." She looked past him to Marcus, who stood awkwardly by the door. "Marcus, come here beside your brother." Marcus moved slowly to the other side of the bed. Eleanor took his hand too, so she held both her sons, one on each side. "My boys," she whispered. "My two boys together at last." Outside the window, the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. A new day was beginning, full of uncertainty and hope. Would there be time enough for healing the wounds of decades? As Eleanor's breathing slowed and her eyes grew heavy, Jake and Marcus exchanged a look over her bed. No longer strangers or enemies, but brothers united in worry for the mother they shared. The doctors were wrong. Eleanor Blackwood didn't die that night. Jake sat bolt upright when her fingers twitched in his hand. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom curtains as her eyes fluttered open. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not going anywhere," Jake replied, tears streaming down his weathered face. The cowboy who never cried now couldn't stop. Dr. Phillips arrived within the hour, his face a mask of disbelief as he checked Eleanor's vitals. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, scratching his balding head. "The cancer is still there, but something's changed. She's fighting it differently." Jake leaned against the doorframe. "How much time?" "Hard to say. Days turned into weeks for her once before. This time, maybe months, but I wouldn't hope for—" "Hope is exactly what we need," Jake interrupted. "And time. Whatever she's got left, we'll take it." News of Eleanor's rally spread through town like wildfire. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered it was the power of family finally reunited. Ms. Winters simply nodded knowingly as she prepared Eleanor's favorite tea, adding an extra spoonful of honey, something she'd never done before. "First time for everything," she murmured when Jake noticed. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor could sit up in a wheelchair. Jake pushed her through the sprawling gardens she'd designed decades ago but rarely visited anymore. "Tell me about your horses," she requested, pointing to a flat stretch of land near the western boundary. "You breed quarter horses, don't you?" Jake nodded. "Started with just one good mare my father left me." "Your father," Eleanor said softly. "He was the most stubborn, handsome cowboy I ever met. You have his eyes. And your chin, apparently," Jake replied with a small smile. "Marcus pointed that out yesterday." The mention of Marcus hung in the air between them. Eleanor's other son had returned to the estate 3 days after her near-death experience, this time without lawyers or threats. He'd brought his wife Claire and their children, 10-year-old twins Emma and Ethan, who stared wide-eyed at the grandmother they'd only heard about in angry whispers. "Will Marcus stay?" Eleanor asked, clutching the blanket covering her lap. "He's moving into the guest house next week," Jake confirmed. "Said the kids should know their grandmother while they can." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "And you? Will you stay too?" "I have a better idea," Jake said, stopping the wheelchair at the crest of a small hill overlooking a vacant pasture. "What if I brought my operation here? Those 5 horses I've been raising could use more space than my little patch of land." Eleanor's face brightened more than the doctors would have thought physically possible for someone in her condition. "You'd do that?" "On one condition," Jake replied, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "You teach me about being a Blackwood. I've got 30 years to catch up on." The next day, lawyers arrived, not to contest wills or marriages, but to transfer Jake's small breeding operation to Blackwood land. Eleanor insisted on sitting up in bed to sign the papers, her signature shaky but determined. "This property has always been split in my mind," she confessed to Jake after the lawyers left. "Half for Marcus, half for the son I gave up. Now it's official." Within a month, Jake's 5 horses arrived, nervous and skittish in their new surroundings. The Blackwood Ranch hands watched from a distance, arms crossed, suspicion plain on their faces. They'd heard the rumors that the young cowboy who married the boss was actually her long-lost son, but loyalty to Marcus ran deep. "They'll come around," Eleanor assured Jake as they watched from her bedroom window. She was right, but not in the way either expected. The breakthrough came on a stormy afternoon when Thunder, Jake's prize stallion, broke through a fence during a lightning strike. The frightened animal bolted toward the main road, where trucks regularly sped by. Jake raced after him, but at 58, Foreman Bill Conway was faster on horseback. The old ranch hand cut Thunder off just before the highway, risking his own safety to bring the stallion back. "Nice horse," Bill commented gruffly, handing the reins to Jake. "Needs work on his nerves, though." "Like his owner," Jake admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Something shifted that day. Mutual respect began to grow between Jake and the ranch hands who had initially viewed him as an intruder. By the end of the second month, they were swapping stories over coffee in the barn as Eleanor watched from her wheelchair, now strong enough to visit the stables. Marcus observed these changes with complicated emotions. One evening, he found Jake in the barn, brushing down Thunder after a training session. "You're good with them," Marcus acknowledged, keeping his distance from the large animal. "Horses are honest," Jake replied. "They don't care who your parents are or how much money you have." Marcus leaned against the stall door. "I spent 30 years hating the idea of you without ever meeting you." Jake continued brushing, letting the silence stretch. "My earliest memory," Marcus finally continued, "is mother crying while looking at some old ranch photos. I asked who the baby was in the picture. She said it was no one, but she kept looking at it." Jake set down the brush. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Marcus. I know that now." Marcus extended his hand. "My kids want to learn to ride. They're scared of Bill and the other hands. Would you teach them?" That weekend, Emma and Ethan had their first riding lesson on Jake's gentlest mare. Eleanor sat bundled in blankets on the porch, watching her grandchildren circle the paddock as her sons stood side by side giving instructions. Ms. Winters brought her hot chocolate. "Never thought I'd see the day," the housekeeper remarked. "Neither did I, Helen," Eleanor replied, using the woman's first name for perhaps the first time in 20 years of service. "Do you think they can truly become brothers?" Ms. Winters considered the question. "Brothers fight, ma'am, but they also stand together when it counts." Her words proved prophetic 3 weeks later when the bank called about discrepancies in the Blackwood accounts. Eleanor's former financial advisor had made risky investments without authorization, losing nearly 20% of her fortune before his scheme was discovered. The brothers sat together in the study, poring over documents. "We could sell the east property," Marcus suggested, running his fingers through his graying hair. "No," Jake countered. "That land connects to the water rights for the whole ranch. We sell that, we might as well sell everything." "Then what do you suggest, Cowboy?" Marcus snapped, momentarily reverting to his old hostility. Jake spread out his breeding records. "Thunder's bloodline. 3 buyers from Texas have been after me for stud rights. I've been saying no because I wanted to build my program first, but if we strike those deals now, horse breeding money won't cover this shortfall," Marcus scoffed. "It will buy us time," Jake insisted. "And I know ranching. The Blackwood cattle operation is running at 60% efficiency at best. Give me 6 months, I can turn that around." The brothers argued late into the night. Eleanor could hear their raised voices from her bedroom but smiled rather than worried. For the first time, they were fighting together rather than against each other. By month 4, Eleanor's rally had plateaued. The cancer hadn't advanced, but her strength waxed and waned unpredictably. Some days she sat for hours with the grandchildren, teaching Emma to play chess and listening to Ethan read adventure stories. Other days she could barely lift her head from the pillow. During one difficult week, Jake brought his smallest horse, a spotted pony named Cookie, right up to Eleanor's bedroom window so she could see it from bed. "You always bring life with you," she told him weakly, pressing her palm against the glass as the pony nickered softly. Jake swallowed hard. "I'm thinking of naming my next foal Eleanor if it's a filly." She smiled. "And if it's a colt?" "Still Eleanor," he joked, making her laugh for the first time in days. That night, Jake found Marcus sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the stars. "Mind some company?" Jake asked. Marcus shifted over. "She told me why she chose you." Jake sat down, waiting. "All these years, I thought she kept tabs on you out of guilt," Marcus continued. "But she said watching you struggle on that failing ranch, never giving up, reminded her of herself when she was young. Before the money, before the Blackwood name meant anything. She said you had her spirit. And you have her brains," Jake replied. "She told me that yesterday." The brothers sat in silence, sharing the weight of loving someone who would soon be gone. In month 5, the financial crisis reached its peak. The bank threatened foreclosure on 2 Blackwood properties. Jake's breeding deals had helped, but not enough. The solution came from an unexpected source, Ms. Winters. "My late husband left me some money," she explained to the brothers. "I'd like to invest in the ranch." Marcus was suspicious. "Why would you do that?" The housekeeper looked him squarely in the eye. "Because I've watched your mother build this place for 40 years. I won't see it fall apart now that she's finally happy." With Ms. Winter's investment, plus emergency sales of some non-essential assets, the Blackwood finances stabilized. Eleanor insisted on being present for every meeting, sometimes participating only through written notes when her voice failed her. As month 6 began, Eleanor's condition worsened again. Dr. Phillips warned the family to prepare. Yet somehow, she held on, determined to see Christmas with her newly united family. The holiday arrived with a blanket of snow covering the ranch. Ranch hands and family gathered in the great room where a massive pine tree touched the ceiling. Eleanor, propped up in a special recliner, watched as Emma and Ethan tore through presents. Jake had carved wooden horses for each child, while Marcus gave his brother their father's pocket watch, found in Eleanor's keepsake box. "He'd want you to have it," Marcus said simply. 3 days after Christmas, Eleanor Blackwood passed peacefully in her sleep, with both sons holding her hands. The funeral drew hundreds from across 5 counties. Ranchers, business associates, and competitors alike came to pay respects. Bill Conway and the ranch hands served as pallbearers alongside Marcus and Jake. Ms. Winters arranged everything with quiet efficiency, her eyes dry until the very end when she placed a single white rose on the casket. "She was the strongest woman I ever knew," the housekeeper whispered to Jake. In the reading of the will, Eleanor's final words to her sons brought both men to tears. "To my son Jake, who taught me that second chances come in unexpected packages, and to my son Marcus, who learned forgiveness is the greatest wealth. May you remember that family is what we choose to build with the time we're given." The estate was divided equally, with specific provisions for the grandchildren's education and Ms. Winters' lifetime employment. But the most significant bequest wasn't financial at all. It was a collection of journals Eleanor had kept for 30 years, documenting the son she watched from afar. "She came to your high school graduation," Marcus told Jake as they sorted through the journals in the study. "Sat in the back row. She cut out your rodeo championship announcement from the county paper." "All those years," Jake murmured, tracing his mother's handwriting with his fingertip. "She was always there." 1 year to the day after their unusual marriage, Jake stood at Eleanor's grave with fresh flowers. The headstone read simply, "Eleanor Blackwood, Mother, Grandmother, Matriarch." "We're doing okay, Mom," he said quietly. "Marcus and I argue twice a week minimum. The kids are getting too comfortable on horseback. Ethan tried jumping a fence yesterday. Nearly gave his father a heart attack. The ranch is turning around, just like I promised." As Jake placed the flowers, he noticed new grass already growing over the grave, stubborn life pushing through. just like Eleanor herself had done so many times. At the house, the family waited for him. Not just a family of wealth and property, but something far more valuable that Eleanor had created in her final days. Jake Calloway, once a struggling cowboy with nothing but debts and dreams, now walked the land as a Blackwood. Not because of marriage papers or inheritance, but because of the strongest bond there is, the love of a mother who had finally found a way to bring her family together. As Thunder's first foal took wobbly steps in the spring sunshine, Jake smiled at the name on the registration papers, Blackwood's Legacy.